Hello and welcome to this recording on the new Azure Firewall service. So in this recording, I'll give a quick review of this new service that was announced on the 12th of July this year. And I'll also like to mention that along with this recording, I'll have a blog post that will be on my blog, azurehangout.com, that will cover the notes of the things that I'll be sharing in this recording and some of the things that maybe are not part of what I'll be sharing in the recording. And I'll put the link to that blog post in the description below. So please make sure you check that out. So what's this new Azure Firewall service? So this is a cloud managed service, or this is something that's managed by Microsoft, at least to some extent. So you as the cloud consumer, you manage the configuration of the firewall service when Microsoft manages some of the components like the architecture components like high availability and scalability. We'll discuss what some of those are in a few moments. So that's essentially what it is. It's some form of firewall as a service. We can think of it that way. So in order for you to be able to deploy this, which I'll show you and I'll walk through a few things with this, in order for you to be able to deploy this, you need to register for the preview. So it's not something that's automatic. It's currently in public preview. When it becomes GA, you don't need to do this step, but I'll show you how to do this step. So what I'll do is I'm currently logged into Azure environment. So this Azure environment I'm logged into, if I go to shell.azure.com to bring up the Cloud Shell, and I'll be selecting PowerShell. So let's go. Yep, so it's currently in PowerShell. So why that's going on, what I'll do is I also have another Azure environment that I want to show you. So again, I'll bring up a new tab and I'll go to shell.azure.com on the PowerShell, and I'll show you how you can register for the preview and how you can verify if you've already registered or if somebody has already done this for your subscription. So for you to get the information on whether you've registered or not, there are two main PowerShell commands that you use. So these are these two commands. So that's this command over here shows me that this is not currently registered for this subscription. If I go and enter the second one, you can see that it's not registered for this also. So I'm just using that to show you because I'll be using this subscription to show you how to do the registration. But I'll actually be doing my demo in this other subscription. So if I run this on this other subscription, you see that I already registered. And if I press enter, you can see that that's registered. So if yours currently says not registered, like this does, how do you register? So again, there are two commands that you use for this. All of this will be on the blog post that I'll put the link in the description below. So if I go ahead and run those commands, you can see the first one says it started to register, and it's registering this feature called Allow Regional Gateway Manager for Secure Gateway. So that's what it's called. The second feature is called Allow Azure Firewall. So I'm registering these two, and that will probably take approximately 30 minutes from when I registered the first one. So this will take a while to complete. So give it a while for you to verify. You can always run those get commands again, and you can see if it's still registering or if it has completed registration. And once you've done that, these two, then you want to run this final command, which is register Azure Resource Provider for the Microsoft.network provider. So once you run that, then that completes everything. So I'll let this carry on registering while I jump to my other subscription where I will be, oh, yeah, there we go, where I will be showing you demonstration of how to use this. So what will I be setting up today? And I'll be walking you through some of those components. Is I'll be setting up this virtual network in Azure with this name and this address space. I'll set up 3 subnets. I'll have a jump host in one of the subnets that I can connect to via HLDP, so I can get to the other server that I'll be using for the test. So this is the environment that we're setting up. The idea is I connect to the jump host through using HLDP, and then from the jump host I can connect to this server, and then I can do some quick tests of traffic going through the Azure Firewall. So let's quickly go to start deploying that. So if I go back to my Azure portal and then I go on the virtual networks, what I'll do is I'll drag this to the side so I can get my naming convention and add IP address spaces correctly. Okay, so I create a quick new virtual network. Or the other way. And by the way, I think I'll increase this so you can see it more clearly. So that's 10.10.0.0/16. I'll create a new resource group and I'll leave the location as West Europe. So I'll create the first subnet, which I'll call Azure Firewall subnet. So this name is important. It's a special name in Azure. So that name is required if you're going to be deploying this. So if you have an existing VNet and you want to deploy the Azure Firewall into an existing VNet, which is what I'll be showing you in this case, you have to have a subnet with this name. In terms of the address range that you'll be using, the minimum allowed is a /25. So you cannot go below a /25. So just keep that in mind. So you can't just use any subnet name and you can go below a /25. So in this case, I'm using /24. So that's 10.10.1.0/24. I'll leave all the other settings as the default and I'll go ahead and click on create. So that'll create my virtual network. And then what I'll do once that's completed is I'll quickly create these two other subnets that I'll be putting the jump host and the workload server into. So I'll pause the recording now. And once everything is completed, I'll be back. Actually, I don't think this should take long. Yeah, so I know it's still deploying, but let's go ahead and if I go on the subnets, I'll go ahead and try to add my new subnet, DOWL subnet, and that's 10.10.2 according to what I have on my diagram here. I'll go ahead and click OK to that. And once that's completed, I'll go ahead and create the final subnet, which is for the jump host. So that will be do jump subnet, and that'll be 10.10.3/0/24. I'll go ahead and click OK to that. So now I have my virtual network and I have my three subnets. The next thing that I'll do is I'll quickly deploy a jump host into the jump subnet and another server into this workload subnet. So both of them will be Windows Server 2016. For the jump host, I will ensure that I allow RDP connection from the internet to it, and it's going to have a public IP address also. For this other server, it's not going to have a public IP address. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a resource and I'll select Windows Server 2016 virtual machine. So hopefully that responds. Yep. Okay, so I'll call this D0 jump 01, give it a username. And given my password. So what I'll do under resource group is I'll use existing resource group and I'll select the resource group I created earlier. I'll leave my location. I'll go ahead and select the license type that because I've got MSDN license, so that's why I'm selecting that. Save a bit of money there. So for the VM size, I'll select a D2 V3. I'll need to, I can use something smaller. So for the virtual network, I'll leave that as my virtual network. For the subnet, I'll change that from the Azure Firewall subnet because this is my jump host machine. I'll be deploying that into the jump subnet. And it's going to have a public IP address, which I'll leave that configuration. For the network security group, I'll allow RDP inbound from the internet. I'll disable monitoring because this is just for a quick test. And I'll go ahead and click OK. And I'll go ahead and click create to begin the creation of the jump host. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll create another server that will be in the workload subnet. So this will be DOWL for workload, SN for subnet. Give it a username also and give it a password. I'll use existing resource group and the same location. Again, I've got MSDN, so save some money on the licensing. I'll select the same VM series and the same VM type or size. So here, so this, I obviously need to change the subnet to my workload subnet. But here, I also ensure that I take away the public IP because I don't want this machine to be reachable from the internet. So take away the public IP. For network security group, because this is not going to be available or it has no direct connectivity to the internet, I'll go ahead and select no public inbound ports. And I'll disable monitoring because we're in test environment, and I'll go ahead and click OK and click on create. And that begins the creation of my other um, virtual machine that I'll be using for testing. So for now, again, I have my virtual network, I have my three subnets. I'm currently deploying this jump host machine and I'm currently deploying this workload server. The next thing that I'll do is I'll go ahead and having registered for the preview, I'll go ahead and deploy this Azure Firewall into this subnet. So let's go ahead and do that while the others are taking place. So to do that, if I click on all services, I can always search for firewall and I have firewalls here, preview. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do that is if I go under virtual networks and if I select my virtual network, I'll see a new tab called firewalls preview here. If I click on that, it's going to give me a link that I can click to add a new firewall. So I'll give it a name. So I'll call this DO FW01. I'll leave that subscription. For the resource group, I'll use existing and I'll select the same location. So this is one of the things architecture wise is that you can only use an Azure Firewall service for traffic within the same region. So you cannot do use it for traffic across another region. So in this case, my traffic will be in West Europe, therefore my firewall has to be in West Europe. So if I go ahead and click West Europe here, and I'll go ahead and select my existing virtual network. So here's the case is if I select my existing virtual network and I've not yet created the Azure Firewall subnet, it's going to give me a bit of a message here and say you need to create the subnet. If I'm creating a new virtual network, it's going to go ahead and create that subnet for me. But if I'm using an existing one, I have to create that myself initially. So public IP address, that's the public IP address that the firewall will be using. I'll create one. I'll call it Azure Firewalls PIP and it's going to be using a standard public IP address. If I want to, I can give it a DNS label. I'll leave that. And you can see that it's static. I'll go ahead and click. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead to the next and add tags, or I could go ahead and review and create. But before I do that, I want to show you this ARM template. So if you wanted to do this using an ARM template, is a sample of what the template will look for. We look like, especially when it comes to the resources. So there's a new resource type called under the resource provider, Microsoft.network. There's a new resource type called Azure Firewalls, and then you can specify what's the different settings are for this. So you can specify the location, you can specify the IP configuration, the subnets that you're going to deploy it into, and that has to be Azure Firewall subnet, the internal public IP address, and on and on. So you can go ahead and do that. So just want to show you what that template and what that resource schema looks like. So I'll go ahead and close that and go under this, I'll review and create. And validation successful, I'll go ahead and click on create. So at the moment now, it's creating, I think it's finished creating my jump host. It's still creating the workload server, and I'm currently creating my Azure Firewall in the Azure Firewall subnet. So what I'll do is I'll pause this recording. Once everything is all done, I'll log into this jump host machine, and then I'll go ahead and show you how we configure this, and then I'll share a bit of some thoughts with you at the end of this. Welcome back to this recording. So that took roughly around 5 minutes 4 seconds to finish the deployment of the Azure Firewall service into the Azure Firewall subnet that I created earlier. So now that that's done, what I've gone ahead to do is I've connected to my workload server that I'll be using for the test. So let's go back to our diagram again so I can show you where we currently are. So back to this. So I have everything now set up the way that you're currently looking into it. I'm connecting to my jump host, and from my jump host, I'm connecting to this server using RDP. So that's what I'm currently doing. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to configure this subnet, a route table that has a user-defined route in it to send all traffic to the Azure Firewall service. So that'll be send 0.0.0.0/0, send it to the IP address or the internal IP address of this Azure Firewall service. So obviously we need to go obtain that IP address. So what I'll do is if I go back to the Azure portal, if I go under all services and I have firewalls here, if not, you can search for it. You can always click on the star to have that available on the left hand side. So if I click on firewalls, I can see my new Azure Firewall service. If I click on that, I have the private IP address there. So I need to copy that private IP 10.10.1.4 because that's what I'll be pointing that to for the route table that I will associate with this workload subnet. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I go ahead and search for route tables, and I have route tables there. If I go ahead and create a new one, I'll call it workload subnet route table. And I'll put all of them in the existing resource group that will be in West Europe. So I'll go ahead and create that. So that I create my route table, and then I can add custom routing to that. So that shouldn't take too long to deploy. So if I go ahead and click on that on the subnet, on the route, I want to add a single route that would say internet route. And the prefix that I want to send will be 0.0.0.0/0. And I'll select next up to the virtual appliance, and that will be the IP address, internal IP address of the Azure Firewall service, which is 10.10.1.4. I'll go ahead and click OK to that. And I'll have this user-defined route in this route table. And then the final step of what I'll do is I'll associate that with my workload subnet. So if I go ahead and select virtual network, and if I go ahead and select my workload subnet to associate that to, if I go ahead and click OK to that, and what I now have is I have this all set up now. So what I'll do is from this machine, I'll show you by default what it looks like with sending all traffic, especially traffic that's going to the internet to the Azure Firewall service, and then the sort of rules that I can configure. So that's done now. So what I'll do now is if I go to, I'm on the workload server now, and I've disabled Internet Explorer and non-security configuration. If I bring up Internet Explorer, and if I go to something like http github.com, and I think I may be, let's see, let me make sure that I'm on the right system. So I'm on this. So yeah, it may still be taking a while to apply my route table. So I may just need to hold on. Yeah, so this is the result that I expect. So because in Azure, just be aware of that. If you associate a route table with a subnet, it takes a while for all those changes to take effect. So by default, what I'm trying to say is by default, nothing is allowed outbound to the internet or the Azure Firewall service, which is why I'm trying to connect to this, and it's giving me this message. If I try a different site like MSN, and let's say if I take away the HTTPS, I'll get a different error message. So I'll maximize this to make that a bit clearer. So you can see it says HTTP request from that to that action deny. no rule match, proceeding with default action. So by default, it's not allowed outbound. By default, only certain rules are they're called infrastructure rules. So what I'll do is I'll actually show you the blog post that I'm referring to. And if I scroll down here, here's the thing that's allowed by default that we need to be aware of. So I'll maximize this also. So there's a built-in rule collection for infrastructure FQDNs, they are called. And these are the only things that are allowed by default. Access to compute access to storage platform image repository, manage the status storage access, and Windows diagnostic. So the FQDNs that allows this sort of traffic to go from your virtual network in Azure that's going through the Azure Firewall service. The FQDN rules to allow that, or what they're called application rules, are the only default. Everything else is blocked by default. You can override this what they call infrastructure FQDN rules. You can override them by putting a denial application rule on top, in which case everything will be denied, including this. But you want to be careful of that because these are needed for some platform services to function correctly. So just be aware of that. So that being said, now that everything is blocked by default, what I'll do is I'll go to my Azure Firewall service, click on Firewalls there, and I'll go configure a few rules. So we have network rule that we can configure similar to NSGs that we're all familiar with, or application rule, which just does URL filtering. So I'll give a quick review at the at the end so you know what I think of this. If I go ahead and click on add application rule or application rule collection here, and I'll give it a name. So let's go ahead and get the name for this. Um, so I'll just call it my app rule 01. Priority, I'll call that 200. Action, do I want to allow? Or then I'll click on allow. Name, I will just say allow GitHub. Source, I'll say 10.10.2.0/24, which is my workload subnet. And for protocol, I'll type HTTP, comma space, HTTPS to allow both HTTP and HTTPS. And which FQDN do I want to allow? If I'll say github.com, or maybe I can say that github.com. And if I go ahead and click add to that, it's going to add a new application rule. So if I wanted to, I could have added many, but I've just added one just to show you what that looks like. So that shouldn't take too long to apply. So I'll just wait for that to apply successfully. And once it's fully applied, I'll show you that traffic going to Git or GitHub. Sorry, going to GitHub or anything. Let me say start dot. Yeah, we can ignore that. So anything that's now going to github.com should now be allowed. So here's the thing that you need to be careful of. I'll talk about this before it completes. Is you need to be careful because it's essentially a whitelisting technology. It does not do any form of security check. So really, it's not really security per se. It's just whitelisting URLs or FQDNs. That's essentially. So be aware of that. And I will emphasize that again when I give my review at the end. So I'll pause the recording now and I'll come back once it's done. Okay, so that took roughly maybe around 50-55 seconds to add the rule collection. So, but that's done now. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my HowDP session. If I go ahead and go to http github.com, and I can see that I can get to this. If I still try to get to msn.com, it's going to complain. If I try to go to github.com, it allows me to. One of the things, again, you have to be careful of this because if I did not add that rule to have start github.com, a lot of this display I won't be able to see. So if I try to go to any other URL, let's say http or https, whatever, http yahoo.com, will complain and say it's not allowed. So that's really it. That's what it does. For monitoring, there's integration with Azure log analytics for you to be able to do some form of uh, collection. You can also, you know, output the logs to a storage account if you wanted to, but we won't get into that today. So now to my review of this, or what I think about this, and that's information, and the information I'm sharing now, you can also find that on this blog post, as I mentioned. So my thoughts on this is from a high availability perspective, this is good because Microsoft takes that responsibility of managing high availability. So that's good from that perspective. But from all the other perspectives that I look at, so for example, I look at security perspective. To me, as what I mentioned on blog, it's not even close to being enterprise ready, right? So I look at, so on the blog post, I cover much more than what I cover in the video due to time. But you see, I cover some of the roadmap features that I've seen online, some of the preview features that it has, and the limitations that I've seen and all that stuff. So security wise, it's not even close to being enterprise ready. I mean, essentially, you have two security features. You have network traffic filtering, which is port and IP to port and IP, or port IP protocol to port IP protocol, and you have FQDN filtering, and that's it really. So there's no deep packet inspection with IDS or IPS. There's no malware protection because what happens if I allow access to a legitimate website and the website is compromised and is trying to deliver malware into my environment? There's no checks for that. Um, there's no certificate validation. There's no MIME type filtering. There's a lot of security features that are missing. That's what I'm saying. So and it's good to see that Microsoft recognizes this on their page because the announcement page specifically states that Azure Firewall is a basic firewall service. And that's essentially what I'll tell me that it's very basic. And really, for with the threat landscape that we have in today's world, that's not sufficient in my own opinion. And for full disclosure, I do work for an IT security company that sells MVAs and stuff on Azure, but this opinion are purely mine, not those of not that of my employer. I'm just talking based on my own security experience. From a scalability perspective, um, we can only have one IP address. And if you're familiar with networking, you know that if you have one IP address, if you're doing outbound traffic, it's got to do source NAT, and that means you're limited to the ephemeral port numbers. What happens if we start pairing multiple VNets to this Azure Firewall service and we have multiple traffic going out? What happens in that case? How does it handle source NAT port exhaustion? So that's something that still needs to be looked into. I give some of my thoughts in terms of some of the limitations that it has on this blog post. There's a cost to it. You pay essentially two prices. You pay fixed price, which is per hour that the firewall is running. So that's $1.25 per hour. That's approximately $900 in a month. And on top of that, you pay a variable fee for traffic that's going not only egress, but ingress or egress. So again, something to consider if you're looking into this. But that's a quick review for myself regarding this new service. Um, I'll be putting out another video this week on deploying Azure Stack on an Azure virtual machine, so please do check that out. Thanks very much for watching this recording, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye for now.